You know the name Abraham Lincoln, of course, America's 16th president. But to really get who he was, you have to see him as something bigger. He was the central figure in a nation's fight for its very soul. He was the one at the helm, steering a fractured country through a storm so violent, it honestly threatened to tear the United States apart for good.
And this quote right here, this is the heart of the matter. A house divided against itself cannot stand. With just these few words, years before he was even president, Lincoln perfectly captured the crisis facing America. It was more than a clever phrase. It was a prophecy, and it was a chilling warning of what was to come.
So, how in the world does someone get ready to face a challenge like that? Well, for Lincoln, the journey didn't start in some fancy university or a powerful political family. Nope, it started on the harsh, unforgiving frontier, in a log cabin. A world away from the Washington, D.C. he would one day command.
I mean, his rise was just incredible when you look at it. He was born into real poverty, lost his mother when he was only 9 years old. By his early 20s, he's in Illinois making his own way, and then, through sheer force of will, he teaches himself law, gets admitted to the bar, and starts this political climb that takes him all the way to the U.S. Congress.
And get this, the secret ingredient behind that rise was just this unbelievable self-determination. The man had less than a single year of formal schooling in his entire life. Think about that. He educated himself, borrowing books, reading by candlelight whenever he could. This wasn't just a hobby. It was this relentless pursuit of knowledge that would shape everything about him.
And on top of the hardship of his youth, Lincoln's life was just marked by one profound tragedy after another. He lost his mother, then his sister, the first woman he ever loved, and later, 2 of his own sons. He wrestled with what we'd now call severe clinical depression. It was a deep, private struggle that seems to have forged an incredible empathy and an unbreakable resolve. 2 things the nation was going to need desperately. Okay. So now we get to the issue that would pull Lincoln out of his relatively quiet law practice and throw him back onto the national stage. The country was literally tearing itself apart, and the fuse was one single explosive question. Was slavery going to be allowed to expand into new American territories? This is where the famous Lincoln-Douglas debates laid it all out for everyone to see. His opponent, Stephen Douglas, he pushed for something called popular sovereignty. Basically, just let the new territories vote for themselves on whether to have slavery. But Lincoln, he drew a moral line in the sand. He argued that slavery was fundamentally wrong, and that the nation simply could not survive half slave and half free. Now, it's important to know, he wasn't calling to abolish slavery everywhere, not yet, but he was saying absolutely no more expansion.
And that principled stand, well, it led directly to this. His victory in the 1860 election was completely divided along north-south lines. He won the presidency without a single electoral vote from 10 southern states. They saw his election as a direct threat to their entire way of life, and for them that was the final straw. Secession began before he even took the oath of office.
The House was now officially divided. Lincoln's presidency didn't begin with parties and celebrations. It began with the outbreak of the Civil War, the ultimate test of his leadership and, frankly, of the nation's ability to even survive. If you want to try and grasp the sheer horror of this war, just look at this number, 88,000. That's the estimated number of casualties, killed, wounded, missing, from just one military campaign in 1864. This wasn't some distant conflict. It was a brutal, bloody meat grinder on a scale that's still hard to wrap your head around. And in the middle of this chaos, Lincoln basically had to redefine what it meant to be commander-in-chief. He wasn't a military man, but he studied strategy obsessively, personally directing the war effort. He made incredibly tough, even controversial decisions, like suspending habeas corpus to keep the Union from collapsing from within. And maybe most importantly, after cycling through a series of generals who just wouldn't fight, he finally found his guy in Ulysses S. Grant, a man who understood, just like Lincoln, that this war had to be won, whatever the cost. Of course, you can't talk about Lincoln without talking about his most famous title, the Great Emancipator. But the real story of how he earned that name, well, it's a lot more complicated than the version many of us learned in school.
So let's just start with this question right here. From day one, was the Civil War a grand crusade to end slavery? The simple and maybe surprising answer is no.
In 1862, Lincoln put it in black and white himself. His main goal, his paramount object, was to save the Union. It wasn't to save slavery, but it also wasn't to destroy it. While he personally hated the institution, his official job, as he saw it, was to keep the country in one piece. And understanding that makes his eventual turn toward emancipation so much more powerful.
And this is where the Emancipation Proclamation comes in as this brilliant turning point both morally and militarily. Now, it didn't actually free all the slaves, only those in the states that were actively rebelling, but what it did was profound. It completely changed what the war was about. The fight to save the Union was now officially a fight for human freedom. The stakes were forever raised.
As the war dragged on, it became clear that Lincoln's greatest weapon wasn't a general or an army. It was his incredible command of the English language. He used his words to give meaning to all the death and all the sacrifice.
On the grounds of the war's deadliest battle, Lincoln gave a speech that would echo for all time. In just a couple of minutes, he completely reframed the entire conflict. He argued that all those soldiers didn't die just to win a war. They died for something much bigger, a new birth of freedom that would finally fulfill the original promise of the nation.
And then there's this line, maybe one of the most famous phrases ever spoken. He redefined American democracy itself, not as a system for a privileged few, but as a government that belongs to everyone. The Civil War, he was saying, was a test to see if a country built on that idea could even survive in the world.
Now, fast forward to 1865. The war is nearly won, and just a month before his life would end, he gives his second inaugural address. And there's no gloating, no talk of revenge or punishment for the South. Instead, he offers this incredible vision of grace. His plan was to move forward with malice toward none, to bind up the nation's wounds.
But so tragically, he would not be the one to lead that healing. His life was cut short at the very moment of his greatest triumph.
The timing is just devastating. 5 days after 4 years of brutal, bloody war, carrying this unimaginable weight on his shoulders, just as the nation was about to start rebuilding, its leader was struck down. His death made him a martyr and left this huge void that would deeply and tragically shape the difficult years of Reconstruction that followed.
So when we look back, when we try to sum up his legacy, 3 monumental achievements really stand out. First, he saved the Union, period. He made sure the United States would survive as one nation. Second, he was the moral and political engine behind the 13th Amendment, which finally abolished slavery for good. And third, through the power of his words, he redefined what America was all about, setting it on a long and imperfect path toward that ideal, that all people are created equal.
Lincoln led a nation through its absolute darkest, most divided hour. He faced down furious opposition, he endured crushing personal loss, and he carried the weight of a horrific war. And through it all, he showed moral courage, an amazing capacity for growth, and an ultimate belief in healing and reconciliation. So the question his life really leaves for us is a simple one. In our own divided world, what can we still learn from his leadership?